Ever wondered how companies know what you think about them? Well, they can't read minds, but they can read your tweets, emails, reviews, and pretty much everything else you write online. And this is where sentiment analysis comes in. Sentiment analysis involves analyzing large volumes of text to determine the sentiment expressed to see if it's positive or negative or somewhere in between, like neutral. And it's intended to help companies better understand their customers, to deliver stronger customer experiences and improve their brand reputation. But it's not without its pitfalls. Okay, so let's get into this. And sentiment analysis is built on top of something called NLP, natural language processing, to train software to analyze and interpret text in a way that mimics human understanding. And there are a couple of main approaches to this. There's rule-based, and then there's machine learning-based, and then sometimes you'll see a hybrid of the two. And let's start with rule-based. So what about the rule-based approach to sentiment analysis? Well, in this approach, software is trained to classify certain keywords in a block of text based on groups of words, or what are called lexicons. And lexicons are groupings of words that describe the author's intent. So, for example, let's consider some lexicons. So, affordable would be one, well-made would be another one. Perhaps we might consider fast as another lexicon. What do they all have in common? Well, they would all be in the positive lexicon. So we can give this a big, happy, smiley face. But then we could say things like expensive, or we could say poorly made, or we could say slow. And yes, clearly, these would all be considered the sad face. These would be considered negative lexicons. Now, the software scans the text for these keywords and then calculates a sentiment score based on the frequency and the context of these words. So if we look at this review here that says, these shoes are affordable, well-made, and shipping was fast, well, that scores highly in the positive lexicon and can be considered an overall positive sentiment. Boy, this is easy. There is no way the nuances of human language will ever get in the way of us assigning sentiment scores, right? Well, that is a fine example of sarcasm, and sarcasm can really trip up sentiment analysis systems. It can be a real problem, especially for the rule-based approach to sentiment analysis. So consider this review. Oh, wonderful. A pair of shoes so well made, they lasted me 1 full week. A rule-based system might pick up on wonderful and well made as being in the positive lexicon category, and then misclassify the overall sentiment as positive, missing the sarcastic tone entirely. But sarcasm, that's just one example. Another one is negation. Now, negation can really trip these things up as well. If we take the sentence, I wouldn't say the shoes were inexpensive. Well, the word inexpensive, that might typically signal a positive sentiment in a lexicon, but here it's used in a negated form to imply the shoes are actually a little bit expensive. So without understanding the context, a rules-based system might misinterpret the sentiment. And then there's also idiomatic language, which can trip things up as well. So if we think about phrases like break a leg or it's a piece of cake, they don't literally mean what the words suggest. So if somebody writes, at this price, the shoes are a steal, a rule-based system might incorrectly assume theft-based negativity instead of understanding that it means the shoes were a great bargain. Okay, so what about the other type of approach? And that is machine learning, the machine learning approach to sentiment analysis. Now, that helps tackle some of these issues by training algorithms on large data sets to recognize patterns, including the complexities of human language. And developers use sentiment analysis algorithms to teach software how to identify emotion in text simply the same way that humans do. Now, that's performed typically using classification algorithms, and let's take a look at a couple of classification algorithms now. So we'll start with the first one, which is called linear regression. And linear regression is a pretty common classification algorithm that, in this case, predicts a sentiment score based on various features in the text. So, for example, to determine the sentiment of product reviews, it considers the frequency of positive and negative words, but also the review length and specific emotive phrases. Another one we can use is naive Bayes, and this uses Bayes' theorem to classify text by calculating the probability of a sentiment based on word occurrences. So, for instance, if we have a data set of restaurant reviews already labeled as positive or negative, then this algorithm calculates the likelihood that a new review is positive or negative based on the words it contains. And another one is SVM, that is support vector machines, and they're a fast and effective classification algorithm used to solve two-group classification problems. So to classify customer reviews as positive or negative, SVM identifies the optimal boundary that separates the two groups, and it does that by analyzing features like word frequencies and phrases, ensuring the maximum margin between the positive and the negative reviews. Now, together, these approaches can help weed out the sarcasm, negation, and idiomatic language expressed in human-generated text. All right, now, depending on their needs, organizations can use various types of sentiment analysis to get a clearer picture of customer sentiments. And we're going to look at a few types, and they all rely on the software's ability to gauge something that is known as polarity. Now, polarity is the overall feeling conveyed by a piece of text, and it can be generally described on a scale. So we have positive at one end, neutral in the middle, and negative at the other end. And then some models take it even further, categorizing text into subcategories like extremely positive and extremely negative. So we have a scale here that we can rank things on. All right, so let's consider a few of these. And we're going to start with fine-grained. So this is a type of sentiment analysis, also known as graded. And sentiment analysis groups text into different emotions here and the level of emotion being expressed. So polarity here actually is often expressed as a numerical rating on a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is neutral, and then 100 represents the most extreme sentiment. There's also aspect-based sentiment analysis, so A, B, S, A, and that narrows the focus to specific aspects of a product or of a service or of a customer experience. So, for example, like a budget travel app might use ABSA to analyze user feedback specifically about its new customer chatbot. This helps businesses understand precisely what customers like or dislike about particular features, allowing them to address those specific issues. And there's also emotional detection as a different type of sentiment analysis. And this seeks to understand the psychological state of the individual behind a body of text, including their frame of mind when they were writing it and their intentions. It's more complex than either fine-grained or ABSA, and it's typically used to gain a deeper understanding of a person's motivation or their emotional state. So, for example, a support ticket saying something like, "I'm extremely frustrated by the repeated issues." I mean, that reveals not just negative sentiment, but it also reveals the specific emotion of frustration. So rather than using polarities like positive, negative, or neutral, emotional detection can identify specific emotions in a body of text. The core idea here is that by building an understanding of sentiment as it relates to a customer's overall experience, specific features, and underlying emotion, an organization will be empowered to make meaningful changes. So, for example, to learn which issues to escalate in a support forum, or to conduct market research on competitors to spot trends and identify new opportunities. Ultimately, sentiment analysis is a tool to extract meaningful analysis to guide business decisions. When done right, sentiment analysis can walk the line of human nuance, turning even the trickiest reviews, yeah, even the most sarcastic ones, into clear insights. If you have any questions, please drop us a line below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.